Hare Krishna. Thanks a lot for that bombastic introduction. Somebody once said to me that praise is like perfume. It's okay to sniff it, but don't swallow. So I'm about 1,000,000 years old now, and when I was 19 and became a devotee, my great pleasure was to have had the association of some of Srila Prabhupada's early disciples, and they made me a devotee. It was good company. Take advantage of the company you've got here now. Introduce yourself to some of these senior devotees. They're wonderful, wonderful people, and I'm honored to call them my friends. Arundhati, Jayadvaita Swami, you are my seniors. I hope you'll excuse me for speaking before you. I didn't set up the schedule here.
That's your fault.
It's my fault? No, it's his fault. And, I was thinking long and hard, because we've done this many years now here at 26 2nd Avenue on the occasion of Prabhupada's appearance, as we call it. But, so I've got my notes, right? I've got, stories and things that Prabhupada did and said in morning walk events and little memories. But it occurred to me that all of that is kind of useless if it's not for you within a kind of context. So I'm going to shut up. What I'm going to do is ask, how many of you here today have been involved with Krishna consciousness for, let's say, 1 year or less? Can I see by a show of hands? Okay, so there are a few hands there. How many of you have been involved with Krishna consciousness for 2 years or less? All right, well, there's some more hands. So what I'd like to do is, for you, the newbies here today, or anyone really, I guess, why don't you just raise your hand, and if there's something that you'd like to ask about Srila Prabhupada, just to give you a little context, my great honor was to travel with him whenever he came to Europe, and I served as his French language translator, and enough association that I have some memories to share. So let me hear from you. I'm sure that you have some questions that you'd like to ask about Srila Prabhupada. So instead of me kind of prattling on, why don't I just respond to what your interests are? Any of you who have been here for 3 years or less, if you'd like to ask anything at all, maybe you've had some questions about Srila Prabhupada or your relationship with him or whatever it may be, please feel free to. That's it? That's all you got?
4 years from that.
4 years old. 25 years. I have one hand here. Yes, Greene. I know I could count on you.
Well, it's a kind of a simple question, but maybe not, because Srila Prabhupada really stressed giving prasadam to people, and people talk about how that was one of the first things that they sort of experienced, and sort of their gateway, sort of like the gateway drug to Krishna consciousness is through the food that we sort of give people. And I was reading, I was just finished the Lilamrita, and so they were talking about sort of how he honored Krishna himself, and I'd love to hear your insights into that same time about how he saw it as he himself was honored.
How did Prabhupada honor prasadam? What was his relationship with foods that have been sanctified with prayer? Well, first of all, he would not allow anyone to leave without receiving some prasadam. That was de rigueur. That was a necessity. Anyone who came, and sometimes it would be food that had not been offered technically on the altar, and Prabhupada would say, just serve it. There was something to the magic of offering from the hands of a devotee that was critically important to him. It wasn't just hospitality. I think hospitality was a big part of it. He wanted people to feel welcome here. And there are symptoms of friendship. There are ways to welcome someone. You offer them a meal. You share gifts. You offer thoughts from your heart. You hear them share thoughts from their heart. And the prasadam was, as you say, it was the real equalizer. Everyone loved prasadam. It was, at the time, it was very rich food. And I guess the story that comes to mind is when he installed deities in London back in 1970. And I snuck up next to him, and they had served probably a huge tray of prasadam. He saw me sitting there next to him and took all the heavy stuff, potatoes and rice and the hull, and plopped it onto my plate. And if the spiritual master offers you something, you can't refuse. It took me about a week to recover. It was important to him that people should feel welcomed, and we know that prasadam has magical qualities. Even one grain of rice that's been offered to Krishna is liberating. So it's important. It's important. It's not a formality. Food is central to spiritual life. The way you prepare it, the way you serve it, the way you consume it is a yoga. It's an act of focus, of meditation. And Prabhupada used to describe that his spiritual master, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, when he would eat prasadam, it was like he was praying. So it's kind of the diametric opposite of, the fast food life that we know in the West. So be cautious, be careful with how you have a meal. That's an important part of your spiritual life, how you prepare and consume food. If it's done in the right consciousness, it's liberating. And if it's in the wrong consciousness, you can get sick. Thank you for your question. Anyone else? Yes. What's your name?
Jaya Shri Radha Devi.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much for sharing your memories. And my question is, what was most pleasing for Srila Prabhupada from his disciples' actions or whatever happened?
What was most pleasing to him that his disciples could do for him?
Not only for him, do it all. Like
What kind of service was most pleasing to him? The politically correct answer would be to say book distribution.
I was thinking about it when I was asking.
and it's not a wrong answer, but I recall with great pride and great pleasure and satisfaction seeing how he would honor anyone and everyone, and would be so grateful for any small thing that they did. There was a child who had made a drawing of Krishna and gave it to Prabhupada before he left France. Was it France? I think. This was a little crayon drawing. This little, come. And Prabhupada's secretary told me that on the plane, Prabhupada put that little drawing of Krishna, pinned it to the chair in front of him, and used it while he was chanting his japa. So he wasn't seeing this as a naive drawing by a child. He was saying this is an offering of love, and this is Krishna. So he appreciated any service that someone would offer. And that was his mission, was to encourage people. And so he would take even a tiny little spark and fan it. There was a very proud gentleman who came to see Prabhupada in Paris and stood up and started quoting verses and basically espousing the Mayavada idea, we're all Krishna. And he was going on and on. Prabhupada was very patient, just like sitting there listening. And I'm thinking, boy, is this, the wind up to some cannon explosion that's coming? And then finally the man quoted a verse from Bhagavad Gita, and Prabhupada's face lit up. He said, yes, you have spoken very nicely. And he took that little moment and quoted the verse in Sanskrit and gave the translation and brought the whole thing back to devotional service to Krishna. And the man was so satisfied, so pleased that he hadn't been put down. He had been acknowledged by Prabhupada. And it just turned the whole thing around. So he knew the art of how to encourage anyone by recognizing even the tiniest little service. What's your name?
I'm Sandhya.
Sandhya. Hare Krishna.
So, during spreading the Krishna conscious movement in Western as well as all over the world, there might be a lot of oppositions. Right? Say, in my mind, I'm thinking of this women independency that created a lot of issues in US especially. And some thought like Prabhupada is brainwashing my kids with the name of Krishna, and many protesting happened. How was Prabhupada moved and how he handled it?
How did he handle when people would oppose his mood by saying it was brainwashing? Very strongly. There's a whole chapter in a book called Swami in a Strange Land. That describes how Prabhupada responded to the deprogrammers. He saw it as a rallying point. So there were times when he would be extremely animated and very forceful and rally people and defending Krishna's honor. See, I think that's the point to understand. This wasn't a matter of pride on his part. It wasn't, well, they've defamed me somehow. It was they haven't recognized Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and that's dangerous for them. Whenever Prabhupada was strong like that, this is important to understand. I think if we are caretakers of these memories of Srila Prabhupada, it's a responsibility to convey to you not just the sentiment of the events, but what was going on beneath the surface, behind the scenes. And behind the scenes, whenever Srila Prabhupada would demonstrate some great strength like that, was his love for Krishna. He was concerned that if people are disrespectful toward Krishna, that will be very difficult for their spiritual life. I remember one Sanskritist who came to see Prabhupada in Geneva, and he was straight out Mayavada philosophy. And he had actually been to India and met Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. His name was Jean Herbert, H-E-R-B-E-R-T, Herbert, Jean Herbert. And he'd written books about bhakti and so on. It was all from a Mayavadi point of view. One book he wrote, Krishna, the divine lover, I think. Everything was metaphorical. The gopis were a metaphor for this, and the dust raised by the hooves of the calves was a metaphor for that, and Krishna is a metaphor. Everything is a metaphor. So he came to see Prabhupada, and Prabhupada had been reading his book. And Jean Herbert sat down, and he saw that Prabhupada had been reading his book. He said, Swamiji, you know how long it took me to write that book? It took me 15 years to write that book. And Prabhupada said, yes, and still got mistakes. He said, if you want to understand Krishna, and he pointed to us sitting in the room, he said, you have to do what these young people are doing. This is the age for enjoying, and they've given that up to know Krishna through devotional service. And they spoke for a while longer. And when Jean Herbert left, we were ready for the go to the videotape, and get the wrap up, and we were expecting him to condemn this man, demon. And he probably was saying nothing. So it was Guru Gauranga said he was a big demon, wasn't he, Prabhupada? And Prabhupada said, well, when he was in India, he was contaminated by having spent too much time with the Mayavada group. But I noticed in his book, he's mentioned Krishna's name many times. And that will benefit him greatly. Wow. So here's a situation where you think the reaction might be, pow, kick on their face with boots sort of thing. And Prabhupada's point was, no, he's said Krishna's name here many times. And that was more the mood. I know sometimes people, we tend to kind of go into this, Prabhupada, the Maharatha warrior, and just clubbing everybody. But really his mood was quite compassionate, caring, and recognizing of even the smallest service that someone would offer. That's all the time I have. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.